Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Both Deontay Wilder and BERMANE STIVERNE go into their fight at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn as very motivated, and both for very different reasons. I'll get to some of that, then cover the weigh-in, some general comments about the build-up, what the fighters are saying, and my prediction. For WBC champion Deontay Wilder, he is certainly in the unenviable position of having to fight a guy in Stiverne that he beat handily the first time around in January 2015. But somehow in late February this year, the WBC decided on the strength of one fight in a 2-year period that it would elevate Stiverne into the mandatory position. Really, it was the last thing that Deontay Wilder needed or wanted, and his team tried hard to get the 39-year-old to step aside so another fight could be made. For a short time it did work, and he got Stiverne to step aside so he could fight Luis Ortiz. That was until Ortiz failed a drug test, and the WBC pulled its sanctioning of that fight. So the Stiverne fight was back on. The only real bit of intrigue for me and other fans, not all fans, some fans are looking forward to this, but I think it's fair to say the majority are not. But the only intrigue really is Stiverne went 12 rounds with Deontay Wilder last time and avoided being knocked out. And Wilder, he has spoken about wanting to correct that in this fight and get the job done. Securing a knockout will show, for some at least, that he has developed and he's improved. Although I did hear Wilder say in an interview just in this past week that he didn't need a knockout, but the most important thing was to look good. And in that regard, I actually agree with him. The looking good part is key, especially if Wilder is to generate some more momentum and hype for any upcoming unification fight with either Anthony Joshua or Joseph Parker. So as Wilder has stated, he's highly motivated to steamroll through Stiverne and on to bigger and better things. He firmly has his eye on the future, and I'll come to that in a moment again. But Stiverne, meanwhile, he wants to right a wrong. He wants to reclaim his title, and with it, some of his reputation. Because let's face it, with the performance in 2015, and the subpar activity in the years since, fans have been openly questioning how good is BERMANE STIVERNE? How good is he? What's he got left in the tank? And the fact that he won a vacant title is often thrown in when people start critiquing his career. And after that loss to Wilder, Stiverne, he also claimed he was dehydrated, and a few other factors contributed to an off night. It did sound like excuses for the most part. It might have taken almost 3 years, but he does have the opportunity to fight for and reclaim what was once his. He also has the opportunity to prove, and this is key, that he knows how to drink water before a fight to stay hydrated. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in action. We've also seen with these two guys, there is no love lost. And the build-up, it has been getting increasingly better, particularly in the last week or so. Deontay Wilder has been getting increasingly dismissive of Stiverne, and he has ratcheted up the ante in fight week by saying he might end Stiverne in the ring, that he needs a body on his record. I know that there will be some boxing fans out there who would argue, yes, actually Wilder does need a body on his record, but they would rather see a live one on it, given some of his previous modest opposition as champion. But that's not the focus of this video, so I'll try to stay on point here. Wilder clearly has the power to hurt Stiverne. We saw in the first fight he was, hurting Stiverne at times with his big bombs. But Stiverne did show he can take Wilder's best, or close to what is Wilder's best. And Stiverne has actually responded to the need a body comments by saying Wilder is the one who should be fearful, not him, as he will do anything within his power when the bell goes. So final media commitments, that's now wrapped up. The weigh-in has occurred. So here is a clip before the weigh-in from Wilder himself.
It's your boy Deontay, the Bronze Bomber Wilder. We're here at the final weigh-in, baby, for Saturday night. I can't wait. On Showtime at the Barclays Center. You don't want to miss it. It's the only one that didn't get knocked out, but this is redemption time. This is the time where we're going to knock you. You know the rest, baby. I can't wait. Bob Squad!
And the Bronze Bomber, he tipped the scales at 220 pounds. That's a couple less than he was for the Gerald Washington fight back in February. He looks in shape, and recent training clips suggest he's got some good fitness behind him, and the quickness is there. Stiverne, however, he weighed in at 254 pounds. And apologies, there's a lawnmower going in the background now. So 254, that's the same as Anthony Joshua. And he's not nearly as big as Anthony Joshua or nearly as muscled as Anthony Joshua. And it's about 15 pounds heavier than the first fight. I'm sure it's not all fat, he might have put on some more muscle, but still, a very disappointing weight for Stiverne. Especially when you consider he's been the mandatory pretty much all year. Even when the step aside was announced and he was going to be off fighting Dominic Breazeale on the same undercard, he knew that he would be fighting. And he's supposedly been training, from what he's been saying, for months and months and months. So I can't really explain why he's sort of come in this condition, because he didn't look in great nick up there on the scale. And it really does change how I think about this fight and how it might play out. But in terms of the build-up, it's done. And to be honest, the whole thing, it's been a bit muted. It has only really been the past 10 days or so where boxing websites and YouTube channels have really sort of picked up the coverage and the amount of coverage. It's all been a bit ho-hum in general. I mean, sure, we've had the false start with Wilder originally to face Ortiz and all that sort of thing, so you might be able to say, well, that's contributed to maybe not as much coverage, but I think the real reason is most fans, Wilder himself, and we heard the TV networks, they didn't want this rematch. We'd already seen it. And we already knew that it's probably likely to be the same sort of result as the first fight, if not worse. So if we get the same result, the same opposition, you know, and it's not like Stiverne has been taking down any big names since he lost to Wilder to help build himself back up, build a degree of hype around him. Might be a different story if he had have beat a couple of top 15 or 20 guys, but that hasn't happened. And certainly the number of videos on YouTube for this fight, talking about this fight, it's definitely been on the low side. If I'm just looking at comparisons with other recent big fights, it really has been quite pedestrian in terms of the amount of videos people are actually covering. Not many channels have been going big with coverage. And say with a big fight, just for myself, I would normally try to be doing a number of videos in the lead up. You know, there's a number of different angles that you can talk about. But for this one, there hasn't been much around. There hasn't been much interesting stuff to talk about. If anything, what has made more headlines in the recent weeks and recent days especially has been Deontay Wilder's constant calling out and criticisms of Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker, and those are the other two champions. It's actually got to the point where some of the statements are so repetitive, I've actually just been ignoring them because I've thought, oh, well, I've actually covered this last week or covered this 2 weeks ago. We've been on this sort of wash, rinse, and repeat cycle. I guess it all comes back to what exactly did the WBC think it was playing at by installing a guy who had barely fought in 2 years as its mandatory challenger. It's almost like they were setting the fight up to fail. It was certainly a very short-sighted move, and in my view, dents their credibility. And let's not forget, Deontay Wilder by association gets pulled into it, and fans are reluctant to give him any credit for fighting and beating someone he's already beaten convincingly. So in terms of the fighting though, despite the bravado, Deontay Wilder has a decent height and reach advantage, and I expect him to keep it long in the opening rounds. Much like the Washington fight and some of his other fights, I don't see him like a bull out of the gate. I expect him to pick his shots, be patient, and cautious early on. He could certainly come out super aggressive if he wanted to, But let's face it, that ups the chances of him walking onto a counter right hand or something similar. And consider, now that the Bronze Bomber knows that Stiverne is coming in heavy, I would expect him to try tire him out. He was probably going to do that anyway. Tire the 39-year-old out before really stepping up the work rate. So until he does that, I expect him to be working the jab. He'll be throwing some, a few heavy shots here and there. He'll try to land if he can. But if in general, I'd expect him to be trying to stay out of Stiverne's way. Stay out of range of some of his punches because he can punch hard. I think Wilder can get a knockout later in the fight if he manages to exhaust Stiverne, really tire him out. But I wouldn't be surprised if it went to the cards again. But like last time, I'd expect Wilder to win pretty much all of the rounds. And I actually see this being an easier fight for him. Easier than the first one. But I guess just in terms of that, I just hope all this Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker talk that he's been engaging in, I hope it hasn't distracted him. And that he does come in focused. Because that's really important. Because if he takes things for granted, that's when the wheels can really fall off. Also, we know that Deontay has had his share of injuries. He's got a surgically repaired right hand. And that's his power hand. How is his hand? We don't really know. I haven't seen him really battering a heavy bag with that hand for some time. And it's not to say that it hasn't happened. And I'm sure he is doing that. But I'm really interested to know how will he hold up physically in the ring. And also, because of that hand, we knew he'd been working on his left more, his left hook and such. I'm interested to see how much he's going to press that into action. And, if he does do that more, it will give the right hand a bit of a reprieve. So, BERMANE STIVERNE. He does have a chance in this fight. It's a heavyweight fight after all. How big a chance? Well, I believe that comes down to more how Deontay Wilder executes Deontay Wilder's game plan. I mean, even though the Haitian has been on the shelf for most of the past 3 years, we do know he's a good counterpuncher. He's got good power. And if he can string that combination together and get Wilder coming in on one, it's a good recipe for success. Especially if Wilder gets reckless. I think Stiverne, he must know that the longer this fight goes on, the more likely he is to lose. Wilder is undoubtedly much fitter than BERMANE STIVERNE. Just by the eye test you can tell that. I can't see Stiverne staying fresh for long at 254 pounds. If he truly is going to deliver on his promise to make Wilder feel his pain as he has said, he needs to come out and be aggressive. He needs to come out with intent, really press the action, get up on Wilder and try to make something happen and make it happen early. Because if he just plods around the ring, as he is prone to do sometimes, I don't think it's not going to end well for him. So my pick, Wilder will win. He'll win late on either by stoppage or a comfortable points decision. Whatever happens though, no excuses from either after the fight. I certainly don't want to hear about any dehydration issues either. Because that would be very sad indeed. But what do you make of it all? Drop a comment, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. That's boxing_squared.